While merely attempting to perform her duties, Jasmine Carter faced public humiliation from Dr. Hanley, one of the hospital's most esteemed physicians, right in front of a patient. Little did he know this patient was no ordinary individual. What unfolds next will astonish you, and it will transform everything at Mercy Hill Medical Center. Stay tuned to uncover the reality behind this jaw-dropping moment that reveals long-hidden truths and ignites a fight for justice. Additionally, please share where you're listening from, and if you enjoy this story, consider subscribing to our channel for more narratives. Let's begin. In the early morning light, the towering glass doors of Mercy Hill Medical Center gleamed, casting reflections of the sky onto the polished marble floors within. Jasmine Carter stood just outside, her heart racing with a blend of excitement and anxiety. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before stepping into the pristine, white-tiled lobby of Weston Park's most prestigious hospital, just outside Philadelphia. The lobby buzzed with activity, doctors walking briskly to their rounds, nurses huddled together, and patients waiting quietly in plush chairs. Mercy Hill represented, to many, the pinnacle of medical care, the crown jewel of healthcare institutions. For Jasmine, it was a dream she had fought tirelessly to reach, a dream earned through sweat, sleepless nights, and relentless determination. Clutching her folder tightly, her fingers trembled slightly as she approached the nurse's station. The polished surfaces, gleaming equipment, and steady rhythm of voices in the background should have felt invigorating. Instead, a strange sense of discomfort gnawed at her as she moved forward. As she stepped closer, the chatter around her seemed to fade, replaced by a tense silence. Scanning the faces of the nurses and doctors nearby, Jasmine noticed eyes darting away from her, lingering just a second too long before returning to their tasks. Some whispered as she passed, their hushed tones punctuated by quick glances in her direction. Her heart sank, the initial enthusiasm mingling with apprehension. She cleared her throat, hoping to shake off the unsettling feeling. "Excuse me," she began, her voice steady but quiet. "I'm Jasmine Carter, the new nurse." A tall woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair turned toward her with a polite but distant smile. "Oh," she said, barely hiding her surprise. "You're the new hire?" Jasmine nodded, hoping for some semblance of warmth. Instead, the woman's expression remained cold, her eyes flickering with something Jasmine couldn't quite place. "You'll need to speak to Dr. Hanley first," she said curtly, nodding toward the physician's office. Making her way down Mercy Hill's gleaming corridors, Jasmine replayed her mother's words in her mind. "You've worked too hard to let anyone make you feel less than. Keep your head high." She had always followed that advice. Graduating at the top of her class, working extra shifts, and gaining the respect of her previous colleagues had all been part of her journey. She'd faced prejudice before, but this felt different, colder, sharper. Finally, she reached Dr. Robert Hanley's office, the hospital's senior physician. He was everything his reputation suggested, tall, imposing, with sharp eyes that seemed to assess and judge all at once. His salt-and-pepper hair added to his aura of authority, a man who had clearly spent years building his influence at Mercy Hill. "Dr. Hanley," Jasmine greeted him, offering a warm smile. "I'm Jasmine Carter, the new nurse." Glancing at her, his gaze lingered only briefly before returning to the clipboard in his hands. "Yes, I'm aware," he said without emotion, not bothering to make eye contact. "Follow the protocols and ensure you're prepared for your assignments." His tone was clipped and dismissive, and he didn't wait for a response as he walked past her, leaving Jasmine standing in the hallway. The sting of his indifference was palpable. Jasmine stood still for a moment, her hand unconsciously tightening around the folder she held. She had known this job would come with challenges, but she hadn't expected to feel so out of place so soon. "It's just nerves," she told herself. "First days are always like this." But deep down, she knew it was more than that. As she started her rounds, the weight of isolation pressed harder on her. Everywhere she went, the smiles felt forced and hollow, as if her presence disrupted the carefully curated image of Mercy Hill. Conversations halted the moment she approached, and as she walked away, she could almost feel the whispers starting up again behind her back. Moving through the bright, sterile corridors, the sensation of being watched grew stronger. Her colleagues, all dressed in their neat uniforms, seemed more like shadows in the corners of her vision. When she entered the break room, she felt the awkward pause in conversations already in progress, as if she'd walked into a room where she didn't belong. But Jasmine wasn't the type to shrink under pressure. Her mother's voice rang clear in her mind. "You're from a line of strong women, Jasmine. Don't you ever forget that." She straightened her back and pushed forward, determined to prove herself no matter how much the weight of prejudice pressed down on her. Yet the sinking feeling in her gut didn't leave. It twisted and tightened as the day wore on, as if Mercy Hill's pristine facade was hiding something darker, something Jasmine was now forced to face head-on. Approaching her next task, Jasmine caught sight of her reflection in a glass door. Her own face looked back at her, tired, anxious, but resolute. She wasn't here to fit in, she was here to do her job. No matter how isolated she felt or how cold the environment seemed, she knew she had the strength to rise above it. But somewhere deep inside, she couldn't help but wonder, was this just the beginning of an uphill battle she wasn't prepared for? Jasmine's footsteps echoed softly down the long hallway, her shoes tapping against the sterile floors of Mercy Hill Medical Center. Only a few hours had passed since her first day began, but already, the heavy weight of exclusion pressed down on her shoulders. The whispers, the cold glances, each chipped away at the initial excitement she'd felt that morning. Still, she steeled herself, determined to push through and prove her worth. Her first real challenge of the day awaited her in room 204. Mr. Howard, an elderly patient admitted for complications related to diabetes. She had overheard whispers from other nurses about his difficult nature, how he'd driven several staff members to tears in the past week alone. But Jasmine had dealt with difficult patients before, and she approached his room with confidence, determined to provide the best care possible, no matter his reputation. The door creaked as she pushed it open. The faint scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, mingling with the scent that seemed to cling to Mr. Howard's frail frame. He was sitting up in bed, his wiry white hair matted against his scalp, his eyes narrowed in a permanent scowl. The moment he saw Jasmine step inside, his face darkened even further. Before she could speak, his voice rasped out, harsh and filled with disdain. "I don't want any colored nurse in here." The words hit her like a slap to the face, reverberating in the small room. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Jasmine felt her heart race, her pulse quickening as the ugly words hung in the air between them. She'd heard comments like this before, but each time they struck, it felt as though they tore something inside her, reopening old wounds. But Jasmine was a professional. She had promised herself long ago that she wouldn't let anyone see her falter. So, she forced a calm smile, keeping her voice steady despite the rush of emotions swirling within her. "I'm here to check your vitals, Mr. Howard," she replied, her tone gentle yet firm. Mr. Howard's glare deepened, but he said nothing more. His bony hands gripped the sides of his bed, knuckles white with tension, as if he could will her out of the room with sheer force of disdain. Jasmine, ever composed, approached his bedside and began her work. She measured his blood pressure, checked his IV, all while ignoring the steady stream of muttered insults spilling from his cracked lips. Each word was like a stone thrown her way, but she refused to let them land. "You people shouldn't even be allowed in places like this," he grumbled as she adjusted his IV line. "What do you know about being a nurse? Bet you got this job because of some diversity quota." Her hands worked with precision, though inside she felt the tight coil of frustration twisting in her chest. She wouldn't let him win, she wouldn't let his ignorance define her. "I'm here to ensure you get the best care possible, Mr. Howard," she said simply, focusing on the task at hand. Her voice didn't waver once. Once she was done, she stepped back, giving him a polite nod before leaving the room. The door clicked softly shut behind her, and for a moment, Jasmine just stood there in the empty hallway, her fingers clenched tightly around the clipboard. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The anger, the hurt, it swirled within her, but she wouldn't let it take control. She had a job to do. As she turned to walk down the hall, she noticed a patient in the room across the way watching her. His arms were both encased in casts from a recent skiing accident, but his eyes were alert, sharp, and curious. He seemed different from the others, and when he saw her glance his way, he gave her a slight smile. "Morning, Nurse Carter," he called out as she passed by his room. His voice was warm, almost amused, as if he'd seen everything that had just unfolded with Mr. Howard and had been waiting for a moment to catch her attention. Jasmine paused, offering a small smile in return as she approached his door. "Good morning, Mr." She trailed off, realizing she hadn't yet introduced herself to him. "Wallace. Richard Wallace," he replied, his smile widening slightly. "Though I'm starting to think they should call me Skiing Disaster after that little tumble on the slopes." She chuckled softly, grateful for the light-heartedness in his tone. "Well, Mr. Wallace, it seems like you've had quite the adventure." "Adventure is one way to put it," he quipped. His brown eyes sparkled with curiosity as he leaned forward, as much as his casts would allow. "Quite a day for you, too, huh?" Jasmine knew what he meant. There was something deliberate in his tone, as if he'd been observing more than just the usual hospital routine. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You could say that," she said, keeping her response guarded but polite. Richard studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "You handled that pretty well. Most people would have lost their temper after the first insult." She shrugged, her professional demeanor slipping just slightly as she allowed herself to relax. "I've learned over the years not to let people like him get to me. Some patients, they're just stuck in their ways." Richard raised an eyebrow. "That's a pretty diplomatic way to put it." She smiled at that. "It's part of the job. I'm here to help everyone, no matter what they think of me." He nodded slowly, as if impressed by her resolve. "Well, Nurse Carter, I think you're doing a damn good job so far. Mercy Hill's lucky to have you." Her smile widened at the unexpected compliment. There was something about Richard's demeanor, his calm, kind eyes, the way he listened, that put her at ease. Unlike the cold indifference from most of her colleagues, Richard seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. It was a small comfort in a place where she often felt out of place. Over the next few days, Jasmine found herself returning to Richard's room more frequently. Each time she checked his vitals or helped him with basic tasks, their conversations grew longer and more personal. He asked about her background, about what had brought her to Mercy Hill, and about the challenges she faced in her new role. "Why Mercy Hill?" Richard asked one afternoon as Jasmine adjusted the pillow beneath his head. "It doesn't seem like the most welcoming place for someone like you." She paused, considering his question. "It's one of the best hospitals in the area," she said simply, "and I wanted to be the best, to prove that I could work in a place like this and make a difference." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "That's admirable. But it seems like you're fighting an uphill battle." She sighed softly. "It's not easy," she admitted, glancing out the window. "But I've never backed down from a challenge before. I'm not going to start now." He smiled, his gaze lingering on her as if he were studying something deeper within her. "You're tougher than you look, Nurse Carter." Jasmine chuckled softly, though his words resonated with her more than she let on. For the first time since she'd started at Mercy Hill, she felt like someone truly saw her, not just as a nurse or as someone to be ignored or tolerated, but as a person. And though she didn't know it yet, Richard Wallace was far more than just a patient. He was watching closely, and his presence at Mercy Hill would soon set off a chain of events that would change everything. The days at Mercy Hill Medical Center began to blur together for Jasmine, each one more grueling than the last. The coldness she'd sensed from her colleagues on her first day had only deepened, a steady, oppressive force that clung to her every move. Conversation still died as soon as she approached, and every interaction felt weighed down by an unspoken tension. But it wasn't just the emotional strain. Dr. Robert Hanley had seemingly made it his personal mission to challenge Jasmine at every turn. No matter how diligently she worked or how flawless her patient care, he found reasons to criticize her. The assignments he handed her were more numerous and more complex than those given to her peers. While her colleagues handled routine procedures, Jasmine was tasked with difficult cases, forced to juggle far more than her fair share. Yet she didn't complain. Jasmine had never been one to back down from hard work, and she pushed through, believing that her skills and perseverance would eventually earn her place. But Dr. Hanley's scrutiny was relentless. His eyes always seemed to linger just long enough to make her feel like she was constantly under a microscope. Then came the day when everything changed. It was a Friday afternoon when Jasmine received the message. She'd been assigned to assist Dr. Hanley in an important surgery, a complicated procedure requiring both skill and precision. Assisting in this surgery could be a defining moment in her career. But she also knew it could be the very thing Dr. Hanley would use against her if anything went wrong. As she scrubbed in, she felt the weight of pressure bearing down on her shoulders. The surgical suite was pristine, bright lights overhead casting harsh shadows on the sterile instruments laid out on the table. Other staff members stood around the room, their faces masked but their eyes betraying the skepticism she'd grown used to. She caught their glances, some filled with doubt, others with curiosity. But it was Dr. Hanley who concerned her the most. His eyes were focused, almost too focused. The normally confident physician seemed unusually tense as he prepared for the procedure. Jasmine sensed it in the way his movements were just a little too sharp, his breathing a bit too quick. As the surgery began, the room was quiet, save for the occasional command from Dr. Hanley. Jasmine moved with practiced efficiency, handing him instruments before he even had to ask, anticipating his every need. The tension in the room was thick, but she remained calm, her hands steady as she performed her tasks with precision. Then it happened. As Dr. Hanley prepared to make a critical incision, Jasmine noticed something, a slight tremor in his hand. It was barely noticeable, but in a high-stakes surgery like this, it was enough to make her stomach drop. Her heart raced as she watched him line up the scalpel, a creeping sense of dread filling her chest. "Dr. Hanley," she said softly, careful to keep her voice calm and measured. "Maybe we should consider approaching from a different angle. The patient's anatomy suggests it might be safer." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Jasmine. The tension, already palpable, now hung in the air like a suffocating fog. No one ever questioned Dr. Hanley during a surgery. His reputation as an expert surgeon was ironclad, and his authority in the operating room was absolute. Dr. Hanley froze, the scalpel still in his hand. For a brief, agonizing moment, Jasmine thought she'd made a terrible mistake. The other nurses exchanged shocked glances, their eyes wide with disbelief. She held her breath, waiting for the reprimand, for the anger she knew would follow. But instead, Dr. Hanley's eyes flicked toward the surgical site, and after a tense beat of silence he nodded. "Adjust the angle," he said, his voice tight. She moved quickly, making the necessary adjustments, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. She could feel the eyes of the staff on her, a mixture of astonishment and curiosity as she worked. Dr. Hanley followed her lead, and the procedure continued without a hitch. Her suggestion had likely saved the patient's life, though no one dared acknowledge it aloud. When the surgery was finally over, the room exhaled as one. The patient's vitals stabilized, and the procedure concluded successfully. But as the team began to clean up, Jasmine could feel the storm brewing. Dr. Hanley hadn't said a word to her since that moment in the middle of the operation, but she knew it was only a matter of time before his fury boiled over. And it did. The moment they were alone in one of the small prep rooms, Dr. Hanley's restrained professionalism snapped. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing with barely contained rage. "How dare you question me in front of the entire team?" He spat, his voice low and venomous. Jasmine stood her ground, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I was concerned about the safety of the patient, Dr. Hanley," she said, her voice steady. "I thought it was the right thing to do." Right thing to do. Dr. Hanley's voice dripped with sarcasm. You think you know better than me? I've been performing surgeries longer than you've been alive, Nurse Carter. You don't get to make decisions in my operating room. She felt a mix of anger and frustration rising in her throat, but swallowed it down. She couldn't afford to lose her temper now, not when her entire career was on the line. I wasn't trying to undermine you, she replied carefully. I was just what? He interrupted, his voice rising. Trying to embarrass me? Trying to make yourself look like a hero in front of the team? Let me make something clear, Nurse Carter. People like you don't belong in places like Mercy Hill. You're here because of some misguided diversity initiative, not because you're qualified. And after today, I'm going to make sure everyone knows that. The words hit harder than any insult she'd faced before. The casual cruelty, the open disdain. It was worse than the whispered comments in the hallways, worse than the cold stares from her colleagues. This was a direct assault on her worth, her competence, her very right to be there. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the tension, startling them both. Dr. Hanley, said Richard Wallace, sitting up in his hospital bed just a few feet away. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of authority that neither Jasmine nor Dr. Hanley had ever heard before. Dr. Hanley turned, his face paling as he realized Richard had overheard everything. I believe you've forgotten where you are, Richard continued, his eyes sharp as they locked onto Dr. Hanley's. And more importantly, I think you've forgotten who you're speaking to. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as the realization dawned on her. Richard Wallace wasn't just another patient recuperating from a skiing accident. There was something more, something powerful about the way he carried himself, about how he'd been quietly observing everything around him. Dr. Hanley stood motionless, his eyes widening as Richard slowly swung his legs over the side of the bed, never breaking eye contact with the surgeon. I've been observing, Dr. Hanley, Richard said softly but firmly. It's time we discuss what's truly happening at Mercy Hill. The room seemed to shrink, the sterile white walls closing in around them as Richard Wallace's voice sliced through the thick tension. His words hung in the air, carrying a weight neither Dr. Hanley nor Jasmine had anticipated. Dr. Hanley, it appears you've lost sight of yourself. Both Jasmine and Dr. Hanley turned toward him, shock evident on their faces. Richard, who had spent days as a seemingly quiet, unassuming patient, now exuded an authority they hadn't noticed before. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a shift in power. Dr. Hanley's brow furrowed, confusion crossing his face. He had dismissed Richard as just another patient, perhaps believing him to be a wealthy man recovering from an accident. But now, the surgeon's face paled as he grasped the reality of the situation. This was no ordinary patient. I've been watching, Richard continued, his voice calm yet firm, each word carrying a tone of finality. And what I've seen is disgraceful. The way you've treated Nurse Carter is unacceptable. Jasmine stood rooted to the spot, her pulse racing. She had sensed Richard was different from the moment they first spoke. His presence, his demeanor, the way he observed everything, it all hinted at something more. But this, the CEO of Liberty Health Systems, one of the largest and most influential healthcare conglomerates in the country, she could hardly believe it. Dr. Hanley swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he searched for words. Who are you? He stammered, his voice faltering. The arrogance that had marked every interaction with Jasmine was gone, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Richard's eyes narrowed, and for the first time there was an edge to his voice. I'm Richard Wallace, he said slowly, letting each word sink in. CEO of Liberty Health Systems, the organization that funds this hospital, along with dozens of others across the region. The revelation hit like a bombshell, and Jasmine's heart pounded as she processed the magnitude of Richard's words. Liberty Health Systems wasn't just any healthcare network. It was a powerhouse, known for setting the standards in patient care and hospital management nationwide. They funded cutting-edge research, set policies that other institutions followed, and had the financial clout to make or break any hospital they were associated with. And Richard Wallace, the man she had been casually chatting with during her rounds, the patient who had asked about her day and listened to her frustrations, was the one at the helm of it all. Dr. Hanley visibly paled, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to regain his composure. "Mr. Wallace, I wasn't aware. That much is clear," Richard cut him off, his voice cold. "You weren't aware of who I was, and clearly, you weren't aware of the impact your behavior is having on this hospital's reputation. But I assure you, Dr. Hanley, that ends now." Jasmine could feel her pulse quicken as Richard continued, his words carrying an authority she had rarely seen during her time at Mercy Hill. "I've been here long enough to observe not just your actions, but the broader culture of this hospital. What I've witnessed is a deeply rooted problem, one that's been allowed to fester for far too long." Dr. Hanley shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and anger. "I assure you, Mr. Wallace, there's been a misunderstanding. Nurse Carter and I may have had a disagreement, but I can assure you—" "Disagreement?" Richard's tone hardened. "Is that what you call the blatant disrespect, the condescension, and the systemic undermining of her abilities? You may think this is just about Nurse Carter, but it's bigger than that, Dr. Hanley. This is about the culture you've fostered here, one that permits discrimination, tolerates incompetence when it suits you, and punishes those who don't fit your narrow view of who belongs in this hospital." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. For so long she had carried the weight of these injustices in silence, pushing through daily microaggressions, veiled comments, and overt displays of prejudice. But now someone was standing up for her. Not just anyone, Richard Wallace, a man with the power to bring about real change. Dr. Hanley, visibly rattled, straightened his shoulders, his eyes darting nervously toward the door. "Mr. Wallace, with all due respect, this hospital has a reputation to uphold. We can't simply—" "You will," Richard interrupted, his voice firm and final. "Starting today, I will be conducting a full investigation into the practices here at Mercy Hill. Every department, every hire, every promotion will be scrutinized, and that includes you, Dr. Hanley." The air in the room grew heavy, the weight of Richard's words sinking in,